my story. Where do I start? Like, there's so many parts to it. I guess I could start by saying that I have a really interesting past. My parents died when I was really young, so my uncle, I love him, he took me in. His name is Mordecai. He's so great. And we lived in Persia. See, what happened was I was a Jew, and so was my uncle. And just recently, it wasn't even like that long ago, our people were moved from their homeland and taken over by the Babylonians. It was terrible. Like, I'd never heard of anything like it. And my uncle would tell me the stories about people that he knew that were driven out of their homelands that they absolutely adored. And he told me that it was like so difficult because after my parents died, he wanted to make sure that I always knew that I felt like secure and loved and that there was someone there for me, and that's why he wanted to take me in. So, growing up, I went by the name of Hadassah, but eventually I went by Esther. It was just easier than saying my other name. Plus, people could tell that I was Jewish if I went by my old name. So Esther was easier. So during this time, I'm about 14. And the king, we had a king. He was great. He was fabulous. Everyone loved him. He had this beautiful queen. He loved throwing parties that would be so big and so grand, and everyone would want to hear about them. We'd want to hear about who went, what food they had, everything. It was amazing. So my uncle told me about this party that the king threw, and it lasted over 100 days. It was so long. And at the end of like the 100 plus days of this party lasting, the king ordered that his queen be brought into the main courts because she was so beautiful he wanted everyone to see her. But she refused to come. And this angered him, made him really, really mad. So eventually, he ended up just telling her she couldn't be his queen anymore because he was like, okay, like, man, that's not cool. So anyway, the king decided that he wanted to have all the fair ladies in the land file in to his palace so he could pick a new queen. And that included me. So I joined hundreds of other girls. It was a crazy group. And like I said, I was 14 at the time. So I was like, the likelihood of getting selected, not really. Anyway, so we go in, we get filed through, and we have to go through 12 months of getting pampered before we even go see the king. So when I went in, and he examined me and got to know me, he ended up picking me, okay? He ended up picking me. So I'd be there in the palace. And Mordecai, I absolutely adored him. And often I would see him at the gate. And he would just be in the dust, just like crying. And at one day I decided, what's up? Like, is he okay? So I sent out one of my servants to go check on him. And so they discovered that Mordecai, they brought a message back to me. And Mordecai said that he had overheard 2 guards talking about wanting to assassinate the king. And I was like, what? Like, that's my husband. So I went and told the king, and I told him, like, Mordecai told me all this, and you need to do something. So the king had these 2 men hung because he couldn't believe what was going on. So then after that, I continued being in the palace and doing the things that I had to do. And a couple weeks later, again, I heard Mordecai, like, crying at the gate. And so I sent a servant out again to see what was going on. So my servant came back and said that Mordecai had a letter for me. So I opened it. And I discovered that there was another man that had come to power. His name is Haman. And he required that all the Jews would always have to bow down to him whenever he went through the streets. Haman was someone I was fond of. But like now, I was like, what? Because Mordecai told me that he refused to bow down. Like, he didn't want to bow down because he wanted to bow down to God, not Haman. So I I was like, all right. And Haman had convinced the king that because there were certain Jews that weren't bowing down to him whenever he went through the streets, that the king should have all the Jews destroyed. I never told the king that I was a Jew. Not because I was trying to hide anything, but because there was no reason that I had to say that. There was no requirement that I couldn't be a Jew before I became queen. So eventually, Mordecai told me that the king had issued a decree that all Jews had to be annihilated if they chose to not bow down whenever Herod, other guy, Haman came through the streets. And so I realized that unless I did something, all of my people were gonna die. And that probably included me. And so I told Mordecai, here's what I want to do then. Let's do this. You tell all the Jews in the land to fast for 3 days, and so will I. So then, the day finally came where I entered into the king's, I was about to enter into the king's gate. And the reason it was so scary for me to go in was because in those days, you weren't allowed to go into the king's court without being invited because you could be killed. And I remember standing there at what you could almost picture as literal gates of death, because if I entered those doors, my life was in someone else's hands. So I walked in slowly, and I remembered looking at him and presenting my request. And he told me, because I love you and because I know that now that you've told me that Haman is an evil man, I will do what you have asked. And my people were saved. And it was incredible.